Welcome back. In the second part of this task, we're going to discuss the dynamic learning environment that you will plan to facilitate in your problem-based learning classroom. I have always been entertained by the phrase, "not my circus, not my monkeys." But as a mother to 3 boys, and then again as a teacher, the phrase has morphed into something entirely different. "This is my circus and these are my monkeys" tends to come to mind as we begin planning engaging problem-based learning lessons. The learning environment is going to look, feel, and sound very different. The quiet rows of students all facing forward, writing in their notebooks, won't be present. Effective lessons include movement, discourse between individuals, small groups, and whole groups. Even the way the desks are arranged will change to facilitate cooperative activities. Technology will play a large part as students will need to discover information, so it's likely that there will be multiple computers going. Now, for some teachers, this may sound like a circus. However, you need to remember that this is your circus. You still have control over how transitions will occur. You will need to communicate behavior expectations clearly and have a behavior management system in place. You will still be guiding your students and interacting with them as you move about the classroom to ensure that they are engaged in the learning you set out for them. Lastly, this type of lesson does not work with the teacher behind the desk. Your movement throughout the classroom engaging with students is an absolute must. The way the classroom is going to sound is going to shift as well. Just as we are using the word problem frequently throughout this course, your classroom should be filled with questions. Questions will be answered with yet another question. It is imperative that you plan the use of guiding questions to anticipated student inquiries. You know your students, and you will likely be able to predict some of their questions and frustrations. Having contemplated these inquiries, you will be prepared to send them in the right direction as they progress throughout the unit. Problem-based learning is only successful when the teacher does not give definitive answers outside of simple directions, or clarifying a rubric, or answering general classroom or school rules and policy. Remember, this type of lesson is effective when we encourage and utilize student curiosity. The chain of curiosity stops when students perceive to have found the answer, so don't give it to them. Make them work for it, discover it, and build those problem-solving skills they need. Now, one thing that teachers are often guilty of is we throw out a great question. You know, the one we really make our students think. We usually get excited to hear what students might come up with, and then crickets. No student raises their hand or volunteers an answer. Generally, we take that to mean that the students don't know and that we should interject the answer after a few seconds of no participation. The awkward pause is actually a powerful tool. Just as we know our students, they know us. If we have provided the answers, if they can just wait it out, why would they engage in the discovery process to produce the answer themselves? But the one thing we have working for us is that if we can outlast our students and allow that pause to continue, students quickly realize that you expect them to start thinking. Most students don't care for complete silence. How many times do your students ask if they can listen to music while they are testing? If the pause draws out long enough, they will be compelled to break that silence and engage in the problem-solving process. As students begin getting accustomed to the expectation that the teacher has for them to answer their own and the instructor questions, they will start taking responsibility for their own learning. It's human nature to do as little as you can to get the desired result. So we have to plan on shifting responsibility from the teacher to provide the content to students having to construct knowledge because we won't give them the answers, to consistently place that responsibility back on the student. There are a few common issues that you need to be prepared for and plan for so that your students adjust to these changing roles with as little frustration as possible. The first thing you will probably come across are resistant students. Again, we have established this educational culture of the teacher providing the knowledge. Students are not going to voluntarily take on responsibility for their own learning when the much easier option is to have you do it for them. And oftentimes, the most resistant students will be your best students. These guys have figured out how to succeed with the current model. Grades are generally important to them, and in their mind, it will be why fix it when it isn't broken. They know how to navigate a teacher-led environment and will most likely not be anxious to change the way they learn. Plan for this frustration. Make sure you're prepared to encourage them. Explain why you're changing the way that they're taught. Give them a solid roadmap and destination. Another thing to consider is not only resistant students, but also resistant parents. As you begin implementing this strategy, student frustration and grappling with the learning will most likely be voiced at home as well. Any engaged parent may have concerns about this new teaching method, especially if it is affecting their students' grades. You need to anticipate this concern and prepare an explanation for parents that allows them to see the benefit of this role change on their child's future success. This role change is also going to take an adjustment period. Be patient. Especially with our high school students, they have 8+ years of habits and mental models about learning. These things do not change overnight. It will be difficult, especially with your first lesson or two, to help your students break out of the learning rut and accept something new. It will take you some time to get used to as well and accept your new role as facilitator. Don't expect perfection. This is a big change for everybody involved. The planning, the learning environment, the expectations and roles are all going to change. Then it becomes imperative that you insist upon students taking the responsibility for learning. This can be hard, as it's sometimes easier to just explain it to students, especially when they're frustrated. This takes commitment. You have to be willing to consistently hand that responsibility back over every time they try to give it back to you. The solution for this is simply your questions. Start a pattern that your students will come to expect, that you're not going to give them easy answers. And remember why you're doing this. Life does not come with a guarantee that all the problems you face will have easy answers, and many cannot be answered by someone else. Grappling with a problem, working through the frustration, succeeding and failing will be part of your students' lives. This is the opportunity they need to practice working through these circumstances that will make them successful on down the road. There are some effective strategies that will ease the growing pains. The first is a matter of planning. You know your students and should be able to anticipate questions and frustrations. Include supports for these in your lesson planning. Think about how the student experience will unfold and build those solutions in. It's always better to have a plan for how to deal with a potential issue and make adjustments for minor deviations than to be put on the spot to deal with an issue you hadn't considered. The ticket is to act, not to be forced to react. Use the anticipated student questions to plan out some guided questions. Where do you see your students getting off track? What questions could you use to bring them back to the broad parameters you set for your lesson? Again, think about the student experience. Identify common misconceptions you could see your students making. How will you encourage them to identify, challenge, and correct those misconceptions? I have an example of a biology unit that I teach about the Krebs cycle in a previous task. As I plan that lesson, I know that students are going to get hung up on the simple answer. Eat less calories if you want to lose weight and avoid obesity. So I make a plan to ask questions that will move them past that obvious answer. Why is it different for different individuals? What makes someone have a higher metabolism? Those questions will force students to look deeper into the metabolic system and gain an understanding of the Krebs cycle as part of the metabolic process. For students that are less mature or more resistant to the problem-solving processes, it is a great idea to give them a KWL chart, know, want to learn, want to know, and learned, in advance. Tools such as these help students organize their knowledge and identify areas that still require investigating. There are multiple other advanced organizers that may be more appropriate for your students or subject matter. Until students become adept in identifying the need for more knowledge, describing any prior knowledge of the subject, and realizing when they have attained the information to come up with suitable solution, these tools may prove to be very helpful. Lastly, you have to plan for your students to have access to appropriate research tools. As you will no longer be supplying definitive answers, you have to ensure that they have a reliable way to find them themselves. With a growing emphasis on technology, I try to include computers and tablets any chance I can. Students' technological proficiency is astounding, and even though they generally gain these skills through social media and games, it is important that we utilize this skill in the problem-solving process. Again, you need to include your planned safeguards and differentiation for access for different student needs. For younger students, you might provide a list of acceptable websites or search phrases. For older students, it may be a little more open on how they go about their research. I like to include using peer-reviewed articles and journals to increase student awareness about appropriate resources, but again, you need to plan for the ability level and maturity of your particular class. Thanks again, and happy planning!